My next guest believes that success comes from burning the boats, committing so fully that retreat isn't an option. He's had to start over from nothing more than once, and each time he built back bigger, ultimately becoming the CEO of the fastest growing real estate brokerage in the world.
I didn't actually become a bigger producer until the financial crisis, right? When I lost everything. Whatever the bottom was, I sold like 7 homes. Then I sold 99 homes, no admin. Then I built a team. I went to like 240, then 470. And then by 2010, I was the number 1 team leader in the world at Keller Williams.
And in this episode, you'll hear how he almost turned down the CEO role and why he chose to speak out during the NAR lawsuit when so many others remained silent.
The settlement came out and my phone blew up, his phone blew up, it was the amount of inbound calls of sheer terror in people's voices. Are we going to say no comment? Or I can say a lot of things. I have lots of opinions.
He also shares his belief that B2B SaaS as we know it will soon vanish and what vibe coding means for leadership.
I don't worry about like agentic workflows replacing humans. But I think we're like 2 to 3 years away from like most B2B SaaS platforms not existing anymore.
The Playmakers Podcast begins in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Playmakers Podcast, where we go inside the minds and moves of those shaping the future of real estate. With your host, Andrew Flachner.
Welcome back to the Playmakers Podcast. I'm sitting down with my friend Leo Pareja of eXp Realty. Leo, how you doing?
I'm excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
I agree. Thanks so much for being here. I was researching for this interview, and I know we've been friends for 7 or 8 years, but...
Actually, much longer than that.
Much longer than that. But the first email I have from you is 7 or 8 years ago during the Remind days. We'll get into that in a few minutes. But I was pretty shocked in doing my research just how much our stories overlap. And so I'm excited to get into that. You are the CEO of eXp Realty, and this is the fastest growing brokerage in the world. You are 42 years old, is that right?
I turned 43 in June.
All right, 43. Well, happy birthday. Happy belated. You are the first millennial CEO of
the public cohort, I think.
To give the audience a bit of scale, tell me a little bit about eXp and where you are.
So we're 80-some thousand agents, depending on the day, in 27 countries. So we're the single largest real estate brokerage on the planet by both agent count and transaction count. I think most of the time when I'm speaking to folks that are not familiar with our industry, and they'll say, what about Remax or Keller Williams, some of these brands that are more recognizable. And I say, well, those are actually brands, right? That's a franchise system. So let's take any one of them. But Keller Williams has roughly 150,000 agents, which is, almost twice our size. But that's across 1,200 broker owners, right? That nice tagline you see on all stores, independently owned and operated.
Exactly.
Right. So we're the first of our kind. I think we're almost twice as big as our closest second competitor. So last year, the Real Trends list comes out every year. We sold 350,000 homes. That made us number 1 by almost 100,000 transactions. But the part that most people don't realize is we did 518,000 transactions in 2024. Then we were in 24 countries. So single largest operator that actually, makes the sandwiches, makes the sausage, and fulfills transactions in each country.
Yeah, and those transaction counts, which are impressive in any market, are actually happening in one of the lowest volume markets that we've had in many years.
Correct.
So you cut your teeth as a real estate agent and as a team leader. I want you to take us back to where it all started for people who are less familiar with your story.
Yeah, so I started real estate very young, very uncommon, especially back then. I think, friends of ours like Sirhan and others have popularized real estate and made it more attractive earlier on in people's careers. Traditionally, in the early 2000s when I got into real estate, it was a second or third career for folks. But I was an oddball in the sense that it was my first career.
Yeah, same. Actually, I got started in my teens just like you did.
I got in at 19. I didn't do anything else.
Except for college, right?
I affectionately joke that my previous occupation was high school, right? Because I got in my sophomore year of college. I barely graduated, and this is all I've ever done with my life.
And so what was it like doing this while you were in college? I actually got licensed at the tail end of high school, so I kind of relate on that front, but it's a lot to manage and to balance.
Yeah, so I went to school in the year 2000 to do graphic design and be in tech, ironically enough.
Okay.
And then, back then college was a requirement. And so I was being told by the tech giants of my time and market, which were the Dulles corridor. It was the tail end of the tech bubble. In high school at a job fair, I was told by MCI and WorldCom That if I, yeah, that's how old I am. If went and got a college degree, they would pay me $150,000, which might not sound like a lot, but
at the time,
in 1999,
yeah,
that was $400,000 or $500,000. And so I went to school to learn web design and graphic design, and the tech bubble blew up my freshman year of college. And it was my first experience with like the cheese being moved.
Right.
And those same jobs disappeared, right? As I was in school studying that, which is, it's comical now because it seemed like the end of the world to me. And, you know, I'm a dad now and I have a 10 and 8-year-old. And like, you know, when they get so upset over something trivial, in retrospect, that seems trivial.
Right.
But I went to a friend's parents' house for dinner and his mom told me to read a book and it turned out to be Rich Dad Poor Dad. And it was, I call it my picture of Dorian Gray moment, right? Like I remember reading that book in high school and fundamentally believing like, how could a book affect you to your core? And to me, it was an eye-opening experience of leverage of people, time, and money.
It was a life changer for me too. I don't know if the book holds up. I'm assuming it does, but even just redefining what an asset versus a liability is. I mean, these were really provocative and profound insights that really shaped how I think about wealth creation.
Well, and I think for most of us, like, unless you came from a family of entrepreneurs, like the model in society is you trade time for money, right?
That's right.
And you add skills like a video game for what your time is worth to make it more valuable. And that was the first time I was like, wait, I can trade other things and I can create leverage. And that the aha I had in the book was leverage of people, time, and money.
But I want to go back to when you were in college. I mean, do you have an idea of how much commission you were able to generate?
Oh, I know all my numbers, as always. I read the book. I got obsessed. I started reading every book I could about real estate. I showed up to local investor association meetups like RIAs, and I met someone who I took to coffee, and I had a little pitch down because Kiyosaki said, go work for free, right?
Right.
So I pitched the man. I said, well, you teach me everything you know, and I'll work for free. And he actually turned me down. He's like, I don't have time to teach not-know kids things. And it turned out, he said, if you're serious about this, call this gentleman. He'll teach you everything you want to know. And I called this gentleman out of Colorado, and he said, I can teach you everything you want to know. It'll only cost you $10,000. And without telling my parents, my friends, unbeknownst to anybody, I wired a stranger all my money. I sold my car, which was my only worldly possession, and I had enough money to buy a piece of crap Honda Accord to get me to school. And I wired a stranger all my money, and we got into this intense mentoring relationship. He turned out to be the real deal and not a fraud, which was nice. But it was a role-playing script dialogue. You know, people make emotional decisions to justify them logically. Like, it was really intense. And part of the coaching program was he required me to get a real estate license because he said if I wanted to be a real estate investor, I needed access to data, MLSs, you know, ironically enough, that becomes a bigger part of my story later on in life. But I get my license, I go hang it with the guy who turned me down, who had just bought a KW franchise. And how my whole real estate career started was I got into an argument with my landlord. He said I needed to find a place to live. And I was in the office surfing the MLS for a rental. And he walked behind me and said, why don't you buy? And I said, I'm a child. I can't buy a house. And he said, you don't know that. I went and talked to the loan officer that was down the hall. She said I had really good credit because I bought and paid off a car. So I had an established trade line. And then turns out I qualified for an FHA loan. I asked my dad. He said no. I convinced my mom to make him sign, and she said yes. And I used my 3% down payment from my commission, and I bought a 4-bedroom for $184,000, rented out 3 of the rooms, house hacked before it was called house hacking. And I had a huge aha that moment, right? And that summer, I called every fraternity brother and any sorority girl who would take my call, and I had one little script. I had one transaction as my experience, and my hook was, let me talk to your parents about your housing needs for next year. And so, like, if I got the kid to convince their parents to take my phone call, my hook for the parent was, I can get you housing for your child for the same money you would pay for housing for next year for the next 3 years. And that normally got them curious enough. And I ended up selling 11 homes that summer.
Wow.
Between $250 and $300.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 21.
Okay.
21.
Yep.
And I made $60,000.
Wow. Okay. So that's probably like more than, per capita income at that time in the U.S.
Yes. And I went and blew it on a 3 Series because that's what a 21-year-old does when he makes that kind of money.
But I want to go back to you, sending in this, was it $10,000 for mentorship? I mean, what does that What's the lesson in that?
Yeah. So the concept of throwing your hat over the fence is like pretty big for me.
Right.
And
You needed it to work.
Yeah. It's like you burn the boats, like hat over the fence. There's so many kind of cute analogies, but it's just committing, right? It's not giving yourself another choice. Which again, I tend to be on rants depending on like what subjects big on my mind.
Right.
Lately, it's been AI. But the one that's like on a personal level that I'm just hyper aware of is the season of life you're in.
Right.
Right. So, I got into this business at 20 years old, and like I forewent a lot. Like on a Friday night, I'd argue with my roommates because they were being too loud because I had showings in the morning.
Yep.
On Saturday morning. And I vividly remember being like 22 and my roommate saying, I'm wasting my youth. I'm an idiot. And like,
oh, I got that too. You have no childhood.
Yeah. I'm grateful for 20-year-old Leo making those decisions, right? Because like the season I was in was obsessive.
Yep.
And I leveraged the asset I had, which was energy.
Right.
Right. Like for any 20-year-old listening to this, it's like, if you talk about work-life balance when you're 20, you're a fool.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because right now, what I could do in 7 or 8 hours is still 10x the output of what I could do at 22 in 12 hours.
Right.
Because that's experience and wisdom that you can draw on. But when you're 20, you just have more energy. And so I tell every 20-year-old, it's like, hey, work until you need to sleep.
Right.
And you don't have a partner and kids that need you. Like, don't waste that.
Well, when you talked about putting in the effort early on, it reminds me of a quote by Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks about cumulative advantage, right? You're lily padding, you're springboarding from one opportunity to the next based on how well you perform in the previous opportunity. So, yeah, you got to, work while or dance while there's music playing.
Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite authors, and I read Tipping Point and Outliers and a whole bunch of his stuff, but I read Outliers in my 20s.
Yep.
And it actually pissed me off.
Why is that?
Because at that moment in time, I thought I was good because of my talent. And it felt like it dismissed, I felt the happenstance of the moment
right,
as like taking away my hard work.
Yeah.
And as I have been very lucky based on the lily pad, I have so much more appreciation for that book because the baseline is being really hardworking and ready and able, but sometimes it's so much luck, right? Like I normally say, I'm just one of the luckiest boys I've ever met because I was old enough to do REO. When 2008-9 happened, I'd already been licensed for 6 years and I had a lot of experience versus like, you see the memes in our millennial cohort where it's like, I was wasting 2008 in middle school, right? Like I'm a geriatric millennial, so I was old enough and experienced enough to take advantage of that market cycle. Then, as tech evolved, I was old enough and experienced enough to pivot into the next chapter of my life.
Let's talk about your career at KW, right? Mm-hmm. Because you joined KW, and I think you quickly became one of the top, or if not the number one team in the country or the world. Tell me about that.
So I love how you asked that because that's a perfect example of an overnight success that took 10 years. So I joined at 19. I did not become number one until I was 28. So it was a decade, right? Going back to Madwell, it was my 10,000 hours. So I had a great career in the sense that I went from 0 to 11 transactions and then to 20 transactions. And I was kind of plateaued at 20 to 30. And then I didn't actually become a bigger producer until the financial crisis, right? When I lost everything. I'd bought a bunch of rental properties. That early success led to a lot of exuberance and arrogance and overconfidence. Mm-hmm. And I thought I was God's gift to real estate and not a creature of a market with a heartbeat. So I was over leveraged. I bought too much real estate and I got my ass handed to me.
Yeah, well, you weren't alone. And actually reminds me of a Robert Kiyosaki quote that I'll never forget. He defines arrogance as confidence plus ignorance. And at that point, you just didn't have the experience.
And I had both in spades.
Hey, well, the confidence has served you well. And I'm sure you've learned from some of those mistakes. But what was it like, having lost everything and having to start over?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was literally, I had 90 days. First of all, I lost 14 properties, gave some cars back to BMW, learned all about leverage. And I maxed out my credit cards, put the money in a bank account. And I had 90 days of oxygen as I did the math. And then I probably needed to go find something else to do. I had left Keller. I went independent for a brief year. I picked 2006 to go spend all my cash and open an independent. I learned all about non-competes and non-solicitations very early on in my life. I'm very well versed in all those contracts now. Part of the deal was to go back and behave myself and not compete with them again. That's one way of settling a non-compete, FYI. And I actually went to my broker owner who was like, hey, let's just get along. You got to be here for 3 years. And he put me in touch with the top agents that year. And I actually spent most of that 90 days of oxygen flying around and meeting with the top 10 agents that picked up my phone calls in Keller Williams in 2007.
Right.
2008 probably. It was actually probably right in 2008. And it was a huge aha because one, I had this mental barrier because I was like 30 to 50 units and these people were doing 500 units. And the crazy part is I don't think my brain could rationalize that it was possible. Right. Like it just didn't seem like in the realm of possibility.
Right.
Like they were superhuman. And then when I spent time with a bunch of them, I actually realized that they were no better than me. They were as flawed as human beings with their own stuff. But they had mastered a niche.
Right.
And they had gotten obsessive and they time blocked and they did lead gen 2 to 3 hours a day. And I came back and I said, okay, I'm going to figure out this REO stuff because the market was collapsing. And I called older, wiser folks than myself. And I went from like 2008, whatever the bottom was, I sold like 7 homes. Then I sold 99 homes. I landed my first REO account. I did it all by myself, like 99 homes, all by myself, no admin. Then I built a team. I went to like 240, then 470. And then by 2010, I was the number 1 team leader in the world at Keller Williams.
I feel like there's a theme here where you identify the gap between where you are and where you want to be, find the mentorship, and then burn the boats and make sure that it works.
Yeah, it's easy in the rearview mirror to think that it was a very sequential process versus it looks like this.
Yeah.
And by the way, it looks like this at all times.
Yes.
And I was actually talking to a bunch of agents the other day and I said, sometimes there's like a macro cycle, but then there's micro cycles, right? Like you could be in a upward year or downward year transaction count, and then you could still have a great month in a down year or a terrible month in a great year.
Right.
And I think one of the things as I've been getting older is like, give yourself a break, give yourself some grace. Like it doesn't matter.
Well, life comes in seasons too. I mean, you and I are both fathers now, and that changes things. It puts things in perspective.
My son's here with me, right? Like,
I think that's great.
He's been, when summer starts, I don't like not put my kids to bed. Like they're with me all summer. We travel as a family. I believe in work-life integration. I think balance is a crazy word.
Yeah, you have to integrate. So I want to go back to when you were reaching peak production. I mean, how were you able to scale at that age with what you knew? I mean, even the notion of a team was still fairly new at that time, right?
And I was doing expansion with my team.
Right. So how did that work? And how did you structure your team?
Yeah, I blew stuff up all the time, right? So one thing is I believe in modeling success, right? If I found a team doing something, I love compressing time. Like that's probably one of the things I've obsessed with my entire life. And luckily, again, I got into rooms with very successful people very early on. And I actually got into the habit of finding the best person on the planet, in the country, in our industry, in my company, at doing whatever I thought I wanted to do next and actually calling them. First of all, they almost always took my call. Second of all, they'd spend hours on the phone with me. And most of them I said, may I come visit? Most of them said yes. One I remember was like, I wanted to do probate because I thought it was an interesting niche. And I called around. So like no level of rapport. Like if I had called you and say, hey, can I come check out your tech company when you started? You would have said yes. This guy was like not a known person to me. He's like, sure, $7,500.
This idea of paying for mentorship, I actually haven't really, discovered it in my own life. I mean, is that pretty common?
I value time above everything. And if you're making $3-4 million a year,
sure, you'll pay for that.
And a stranger calls you to say, tell me everything you do and everything you've distilled over the last 10 years, that's a big ask. If somebody called me right now, I'd say no just because of the value of time and money for the enterprise.
Right.
But this guy was like, give me $7,500, and not only can you come over, I'll let you shadow me, and then I'll give you every script I've ever written. I was like,
wow. And did you ever propose a mentorship for fee arrangement, or was that always them?
No, so sometimes it was part of my script. I'll be like, I'll pay you for your time. And this guy had it dialed in. And I flew to San Francisco, spent the whole day in his office, and he gave me all the scripts. And the best thing that came out of that is I came to the conclusion very quickly. I had zero interest in that business model. One, it was highly, highly emotional during a traumatic time. I listened to his calls where he was calling, where he's prospecting, and people were in tears. I called it an ambulance chaser, like all the things that I did not underwrite in my thought process that were very real. And that $7,500, when I look back on it, is some of the best money I've ever spent.
Oh, high ROI.
Because most agents or entrepreneurs say, you know what, I'm going to try this.
Right.
And fill in the blank. PPC, direct mail, Facebook. And all of a sudden, what does trying look like? It's just experimenting because you don't know what you're doing.
But people have run these experiments before, learn from them. So these are less mentors and more coaches almost.
If I can write somebody a check to give me 2 years or 5 years of what not to do, it's almost more interesting than for you to tell me what to do.
So there's a lot to cover here. I want to talk about this turning point where you realized that you wanted to go from production into entrepreneurship as a tech leader or as a lender.
The pivot actually was during the financial crisis.
Okay.
So going from selling 25 to 50 homes as a solo producer with an assistant versus selling 400 to 600 homes as a team leader was the actual kind of transformation from a real estate agent to a business owner.
Right.
Right. Because when I was selling 400 to 600 homes, I had a staff, I had payroll, I had a lease, I had copier machine leases. Like real estate sales is entrepreneurship. But let's go back to the cash flow quadrant. It's the S quadrant. You're self-employed, right? Which is very different than the B quadrant, where it's like when I was selling REO the first time, I was like, I'm an entrepreneur. Ariana and I took a 28-day trip to Southeast Asia, different time zone, and the world didn't burn down. And I got home and I was like, oh, look, we made all the money, right? And I was physically not there, and I was unavailable by time zone. So that's when the shift really happened. And by the way, like unit economics and margin, I learned that selling REO because, I think my average price point was $178,000 at like 2.5%.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's a volume play.
You needed to figure, like, my maniacal obsession with margin came from that. And so the question you asked me, it's like, it's in retrospect, or I was like, oh, I decided to do that. No, I didn't. Right. So financial crisis, I was doing a ton of REO. It started to dry up, right? The market started healing, which was a great thing. Dodd-Frank changes everything. Banks can no longer lend money to investors that a property doesn't cash flow. Basically, you can't buy, fix, and flip.
Yeah. Yep.
Post Dodd-Frank, and that's like a small byline that I don't think most people caught.
Yeah.
And I was
consequential.
I was in the room when it happened as representative of NAR, and I was like, oh, this is going to change everything for this niche. And I was like, and so I went home and I talked to some family friends, doctors, dentists, and I'm like, I think this is going to be a thing. Let's put some hard money out there. It's back to like, it's that iterative process. Like, I think this may be directionally accurate, so let's do a little bit of it. And I lent $1.8 million in year one, and then in year two it was like $10 million. I was like, whoa, like not too many things I do in life go 10x.
Right.
And so you're like, okay, well, maybe I need to like raise a fund, and then now I need to sell loans. And by the way, like, that was as foreign of a concept
on the secondary market
for short-term debt as being a mega team leader in 2004. And I literally got on a plane to New York and actually called on all the people I knew from REO who had pivoted to REO to rental and said, hey, I have these loans with a like 11, 12% coupon. Would you buy them? And they're like, no, there's no securitization for that. I was like, come on, you guys know me. And I literally talked some funds into buying debt.
Wow. Okay. And at this time, were you still running your real estate team?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you manage multiple businesses?
Yeah. So I love leverage, right? Go back to being 18 years old and understanding the concept. And I think where educational system in the world is broken is we are taught to like work on our weaknesses. Like, think about that. You get a bad grade, you got to go practice that. Like, the reality is, as entrepreneurs, like, if you're not detailed, you hire a good CFO, right?
Sure.
Like, you're not a good operator, hire a COO. And all of a sudden, you're a brilliant leader who leverages talent.
Right.
I'm not a manager of people. And so I need to get out of the way and let someone who's talented at that role do that. So, I mean, the short answer for me, it's like, well, I'm not really good at that. So I need to replace myself as soon as possible and then focus on my skill sets, which, if I had to point to them, it's probably lead gen growth, Right. And then getting out of the way and then just optimizing the system.
Yeah, something that our mutual friend Sharon Srivatsa always says is that a good CEO manages people, vision, cash. People, vision, cash. That's really what it is.
That's what I obsess with every single day.
All right. So then you co-founded Remind. Talk to us about how that came to be.
So again, all accidental sequential, right? So the lending experience, I was just trying to solve a need because I saw a change in policy. And then I was like, hey, I just lent $20 million. Like that's starting to become meaningful. And so I called around and I was like, hey, I need software for this. Mm-hmm. And literally I called Encompass and I called all these companies. They're like LOS systems, loan origination systems are like geared towards residential lending, like GSE, Fannie, DU underwriting, all these things. I'm like, I don't need any of that. I just need this, that, and that. And that's actually how I started building technology. So I actually was quoted $45,000 for V1. $450,000 later.
Sounds about right.
I had something of a workable prototype and had 3 engineers working for me full time. And it was beautiful. It was cradle to grave. And I could take a lead from our website, pull credit, start the underwriting process, originate the docs, and send it to the settlement table.
Right.
And we built that cradle to grave. What I did not have was auto-population of public record data.
Because it didn't exist or wasn't democratized?
Well, it did exist. I just called 2 companies that I'll leave unnamed, but you can guess the 2. Yep. And the guy who picked up the phone quoted me like $300,000 for 8 counties. And I was like, that's wild. I can't afford that. And that was like annually. And it just so happened in November of 2015, Zillow was hosting a hackathon, which is probably, I think, where we met shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I'll say where we met in the story. And then they were hosting a hackathon in Seattle. We competed. There was about 200 teams, and it was the debut of a public record and MLS API together. I actually just wanted, and I've told this story to Zillow many times, I just wanted to plug in the data. I was going to hit download and go home.
Right.
But they're like, no, you have to compete. And I took 2 engineers that we had hired, and we won the whole thing. I still got a picture holding the check. I think our prototype was called Real Deal because it was a data mining tool to find deals. And we went home and they let me keep the API. I thought it was great. They gave me like $3,000 and an API that I wanted. And then I get a call in like February saying, hey, come to Vegas, where so you and I met at the MLS Summit Forum. We want you to show how you're leveraging the API. And they're like, you need to come up with a company name concept. That weekend, I remember playing on GoDaddy, trying to find the shortest domain that I could afford. And it turned out that Remine is real estate mining.
Yep.
It was $5,500, which seemed like an enormous amount of money, but it was like, it was funny negotiating with the URL broker. I was like, I'll give you 3,000. He's like, 5,500. I was like, 4,000, 5,500. Like after the 4th time, he's like, I own 10,000 URL. Like,
yep,
this is a character-based algorithm.
Yeah, take it or leave it.
It's $5,500. And so I wired him the $5,500, and we went, with an MVP of something we built literally over a weekend. And, I was lucky enough to have some of the leaders of the MLS industry go, if you actually build that, you have a customer in me, call me back.
Right. I mean, you talk about these advances in your career being almost circumstantial, but how do you know when to double down on what you're doing versus exploring new opportunities?
When you hear the story or you see a LinkedIn profile, you're only getting the highlight reels. Like there's a ton of shit that I did that I lost $300,000 on trying to do assisted living facilities. I lost $750,000 on a development that went bad, like in the same late 20s, early 30s, where you lose sleep at night, you freak out, you question yourself, you throw up, like, losing 300 or 700 or 10,000 matters if that's all you had in that moment, right? We just settled the litigation for NAR related, and I approved the largest wire I've ever approved. But that's a completely different feeling because it's, publicly traded versus, hey, this is out of my piggy bank, right? So I think one of the problems for people who are getting the highlight reel, you just don't see the entire iceberg.
Right.
And so there's been plenty of times I pushed the chips in and it did not work out. Luckily, it's worked out more than it's failed.
Okay, let's transition to role as CEO of eXp Realty. You took the helm at one of the most disruptive times in the industry, right? The NAR settlement, which you just mentioned, an inventory crisis, volume is down. What is it like to lead through that market?
So again, sequential, kind of accidental.
But you knew what you were getting into when you were asked to take the role.
I'll tell you how it happened. So I sell both my businesses. I'm in South Florida, mostly spearfishing, when a friend calls me and says, hey, you're going to get a call from this area code, pick it up. And surprisingly, Glenn and I had never actually met or spoken before. And Glenn is on the other line, and he goes, hey, I heard some crazy cool things about you.
And this is Glenn Sanford, CEO of eXp
Yes.
World Holdings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So he's like, hey, I have, do you want to be my CTO? Like, just like 10 seconds in. I said, I can play one on TV, but I don't actually like it. I'm not technical. I'm a non-technical founder of a tech company, which I think makes us very common.
Yeah, you know enough to be dangerous.
It was actually leading a tech company was very different than leading sales companies, like real estate and lending. It was dramatically different. And actually, I think it is a dovetail into where I think the world's going.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that in real estate or lending or even building houses, like you couldn't really lie to me. I don't need to be a Class A contractor. I'd walk around with a tennis ball and I'd put it on the floor. And if the ball rolled, we had a problem. Right? Or like you told me you were delayed and you blame the county. I'd go down to the county and ask to see when the permit was submitted. Then I'm like, no, that's on you. That's 4 weeks behind. It's coming out of, I'm not paying a change order fee. And it's part of my, critical path contract with you.
You do the work, you do the research.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if like when Remind went down for like an hour and Bob Hale called me, I was like I can't like open the code and read it.
Right.
Right. So there was a very kind of imposter syndrome as a non-technical founder of a tech company that really was different for me versus as a real estate. Like I could out close my listing agents. I could out lend my loaning officers. There's nothing about a collateralized debt contract I couldn't actually read and understand.
Yep.
And so when Glenn called me, I said, I have zero interest in that. And I politely hung up. And then he called me back a week later. And he said, I wasn't expecting you to get off the phone with me. Next time we're in the same town, let's hang out. And we got along super, super well. He asked me, he said, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, I've done this 3 times now. I'm probably going to start another company. He said, great. What's the idea? I said, I don't have it. I'm kind of burnt out. He said, cool. Why don't you come hang out with me for like 6 months? I'll pay you some money. I have a little company that became a big company. That was like the very descriptive explanation. I went from 10,000 to 70,000 agents.
Yeah.
And he's like, I just need help. I just need smart people around me who are willing to make decisions. And he goes, and more specifically, I need someone who thinks like me, he called me a red-blooded entrepreneur. And he's like, I'll give you a title. You can pick whatever title you want. You don't have to be public facing or agent facing. Just help me just fix stuff. And he said, when you get the idea of what you're going to do next, like we can either buy that company and partner on it, or I can invest in it and I'll high five you. And it was really cool getting to know you.
Yep.
So it was like in salesmanship, that dude, it can sell because he basically made it really hard to say no. And so I joined the company over 3 years ago, which I don't think most people realized, as the president of our affiliated companies, which is an innocuous kind of catch-all name. It gave me the authority to sign stuff. So I sold off some businesses we shouldn't have been in. I bought some other ones. I optimized, I moved some dials. And 6 months in, he comes to me and goes, hey, are you doing this? I was like, uh-huh. He's like, did you do that? I was like, yep. He's like, are you controlling this? I was like, uh-huh. He's like, well, unbeknownst to you, you're kind of running the whole company. So I come up with a new title, it's Chief Strategy Officer. And he said, according to the Business Review, Harvard Business Review, that's like, he called it a shadow CEO. That's what he told me he read it. And it gives you, like, we'll make you a Section 16 officer. You can control anything you need, but still behind the scenes. And I was like, well, that sounds good. And that was 6 months in. And every 6 months since that, we'd sit down. He's like, okay, I'm ready. I was like, for what? He's like, for you to be CEO. I'm like, I'm good.
Right.
And I actually said, I remember like 12 months in, I said, this is the first time in my life that I'm the fun uncle and not dad. I've always been the founder and CEO, like the good, the bad, the ugly, like, that
oh yeah,
soul crushing pressure when it's all you. And I was like, I like, this is good. Like, I don't like, you can be dad. I'm being the fun uncle.
So what led you to be dad during such a tough market?
6 months. And then March 15th of 2024, the settlement came out and my phone blew up. His phone blew up. it was the amount of inbound calls of sheer terror in people's voices. And to his credit, that weekend we were on the phone with lawyers. I kind of came to the conclusion, I was like, on Monday, we're going to have to make a decision. Are we going to say no comment? Or I can say a lot of things. I have lots of opinions. And I said, but, it's probably going to cost more money if I say what I really think. And he said, do what you think is best for our agents. And that Monday morning, I just posted that I was going to go live on YouTube. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
53,000 human beings showed up concurrently. Jack Miller called me the next day. He said, I think you've garnered the single largest audience ever in our industry, period.
Wow, there was a vacuum of leadership. There was a vacuum in leadership, and a lot of people were routing their comments through their attorneys, and it was just a bunch of boilerplate nonsense.
And I just went through the paragraph by paragraph and kind of said my opinion. And I think that summer I did like 94 media interviews, like CNBC, CNN, Business Insider. And by that was Monday. By Friday, the board called with Glenn, and they were like, we're CEO. We're going to announce it on Monday. And I went into my script, right? I'm good. Like, no, you didn't hear us. Like, you're the CEO. Check your email. We filed an 8K. And I called Glenn over the weekend, kind of laughingly. I'm like, so what really happened? He said, and again, this is a testament to the humility and the self-awareness Glenn has. He said, I was doing a town hall with a bunch of agents. And when it got to Q&A, they just said, when's Leo CEO? And he said, one of them said, we need a wartime general. And that dude's a savage. So
that's right. There's a difference between peacetime and wartime. And good on you for having the courage, and kudos, because I think a lot of the industry was looking for that leadership. You stepped up in a big way. It obviously paid professional dividends for you and for the entire eXp community, but it really had a bigger impact on the whole real estate world. And it gave people some direction. It gave people some voice, some reason. So thank you for doing that.
I think what makes me different is I'm genuinely one of them, right? Like, these are my friends. Like, I grew up with them. Like, yeah. It's such a amazing, humbling opportunity.
And you've been in the trenches with them.
Like, literally competing with them in the local markets. Like, I did a keynote May in DC to like 600 people. And I said, raise your hand if we did a deal together. And like 25 hands went up.
I'm sure.
And like one guy came up and pulled an email from his Gmail and is like, where I was the listing agent, who's the buyer's agent.
Wow.
And so like my commitment to them, like, I didn't come from a different industry. I'm not like some hired corporate gun. I didn't come from private equity or like these are my friends. And I fed my family the same way they feed theirs today.
So going to the NAR settlement, we are here, a year and a quarter after the settlement was official. After the NAR ruling came out, tell me, what are the practical consequences that ruling has had?
So I'm an eternal optimist. I try to see the good in everything, and I think the attorneys don't care about consumers. I think it was a complete money grab. I think they're taking a percentage while saying we take percentages. I mean, like, the whole irony of it is ridiculous. But what I will say is, I do like the fact that real estate professionals have to have a forced compensation conversation. Yep. Like, I am like, how I feel about most of my rants. Like, I think the more transparency for the consumer, the better. So, as this has evolved, I think, going through it, I was calling it, we're going to experience a messy middle. And we're literally on the summer after. Last summer, I said to people, I was like, there's going to be new agents joining our industry next summer that when we explained to them in the olden days, where we actually put strangers in a car and didn't have a signed agreement with them, outlining what you were going to pay me for my services, it's going to seem ridiculous. And so that's the upside I see to it. I said it back then, I'll say it right now. Like, it is an open capitalistic system. I don't think it was argued well enough during the litigation. It's like, do you guys not think we fiercely compete for business?
Of course you do.
If there was 30%, 40% of arbitrage, and arbitrage by definition is a disallocation of capitalism, we would have cut each other for it.
Exactly.
We would have found a race to the bottom. And again, publicly traded real estate companies, I mean, we're in the single digits in net income if we're lucky, right? So when I heard and saw a rhetoric of 40, 50%, 60%, I'm like, where's it coming from? Like people have to be compensated for the services rendered.
Do you think the NAR settlement is going to have a material impact on the amount of agents doing business or the aggregate compensation for the industry?
That's a great question that and by the way, I'm on camera all the time. And so there's no you gotcha moment. What I've said, and I will continue to say, is let's see what happens, right? I think, there's a spectrum. Like if something is too expensive, you have no customers. If you do something for too little money, you'll go out of business. And the happy medium between consumption and services rendered is somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And what we're seeing is consumers are still willing to pay the fee they're willing to pay.
Right. So no impact, any impact, wait and see.
So again, what's happened since, it's been a fluctuation that is very comparable to seasonal adjustment.
Right.
And I am for a world where, startups and people can be innovative. And if you find a better mousetrap, you should win. It's capitalism.
That's right. Yeah. Everyone here listening to this podcast should know how Leo feels about clear cooperation and listing access. So I promise we're not going to relitigate that. However, I am curious, and I haven't got a straight answer from a lot of leaders on this.
I will give you straight answers.
Where do you think it will shake out? Right. And is it going to be settled in court? Is it going to be a market shift that kind of snuffs out a lot of this debate and conversation? Where does this play out?
Yeah, no, I will answer very directly as to what's at stake, right? So, and my vantage point is different because I operate in 27 countries.
Sure.
So I don't think most people appreciate that the way we do real estate in North America, US and Canada, is unique to the whole world. Outside of those two countries, it's basically just listing agents, and you take a listing, and then you either pay for placement on a portal, which behaves like when you and I got started. Like I'd put it in the Washington Post and you put it in the San Francisco Chronicle, and we paid $150 to advertise an open house. That's effectively what portals are internationally.
Yep.
Right? And it's winner take all. So in the UK, it's a right move. They're the 8,000-pound gorilla. REA, owned by Rupert Murdoch, tried to buy him last year for like $8.3 billion in cash. Think about that. Maybe 1 million transactions happen in the UK. By that financial metric, Zillow's undervalued by like 3x. Mm-hmm. Think about that. By total transaction count as an advertisement model. We've evolved organically and naturally to have this cooperative business model in the US. And NAR has been able, and like I was speaking in Japan and Australia as Remind, where they would call me and say, will you build me an MLS system? And I didn't want to take anybody's money because I said, you cannot do that without organized real estate. And they said, explain it to me. So like I actually analyzed it 10 years ago from the technology standpoint. I said, you can have all the beautiful technology you want. Like Japan has every public record since 1954 in a perfect database with one government agency called the Minister of Interior. And it's $3 a record. It's like perfect. Unlike our country where it's like 3,500 municipalities.
Yep.
But what you don't have, I used to tell people, and I've been on record on like CMLS stages as Remind, where I said, we have a double-sided coin in this country. One is cooperative compensation, which by the way was like the overarching tying mechanism to the system. And the flip side of that is mandatory participation. So the reason we all played by the same rules as fierce competitors is that I said, okay, I agree to give Andrew all my data on day one, only because Andrew's promising to give me all his data on day one.
It's pretty wild that system exists.
Right? And what really made it interesting for us 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when it started to proliferate was that you'd also tell me what you're willing to pay me and I'd tell you what I was willing to pay you. And that's what became the MLS. And so a couple distinctions that is really important to point out. These are not laws. Right? And sometimes people get like, kind of even how does it shake out? I'm like, well, first of all, like when people are like, they can't do that. I'm like, sure they can.
Right.
They don't have to participate, but guess what? They don't have to put up with your stuff either.
Right.
Right. So like someone can make a business decision to not participate. And there could be consequences like you're excluded from the co-op or you're fined because that's like what a co-op sets the rules.
Yeah. I mean, I get all of that. I think where it starts to get puzzling for me is the vast majority of people support open access to listings. Obviously, it's great for consumers on both sides of it, buyers and sellers.
I agree.
But I think that it gets a little harder when you are a brokerage competing in a market and somebody who dominates that market is keeping listings off market. If you look at the game theoretical outcome of what happens there, it results in a lot of walled gardens, which I think is very dangerous and a really
we're aligned there
dystopian future. But I just don't know what to tell those broker leaders who are trying to compete in those markets when, there's somebody who's not really being a great actor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's binary. I think it's black and white. we cooperate or we don't.
I agree.
And I think there's some leaders who think this gray area exists, which I think is just sheer ignorance, because the concept of let me try it off the market to then put it on the market is predicated on a market existing.
Exactly.
So what I've said to other folks is like, we some of the conversations I hear,
you can't have your cake and eat it too,
are very misinformed of like, I'm the third largest brokerage, I'm the fifth largest. No, you're not. You're the third largest independently owned. But like, let's say Anywhere decides to do it collectively across 7 brands. Let's say Remax decides to do it across all their franchise. Let's say Keller Williams decides to do it. Like, you're not even top 10.
Right.
And all of a sudden, there's entities with hundreds of thousands of agents that are 2 or 3 times my size.
All right. I want to ask you some leadership and productivity questions that have been on my mind.
Sure.
So I think you talk a lot about radical prioritization with an organization as large as eXp and all you have going on, not only in your professional life, but your personal life. How do you think about prioritization? Do you use a certain framework?
Yeah. So one of the things I've always prided myself on is responding to everybody. Like, people have asked me what shifted running a business of this size, because I've ran a business of 1, of 10, of 50, of 300, and now of, FTEs like 2,500, let alone the 82, 83, 84,000 agents we support on a daily basis. So what really shifted for me is I officially ran out of time. And so I think this applies to an entrepreneur of one, where like, look, in entrepreneurship, like there is no clock in, clock out, right? Like you can actually make a to-do list that never ends as an entrepreneur.
That's right.
At this size scale, I will never get to anything ever again in its entirety. So, they're like, to quote Vaynerchuk, like you have to live in the clouds and the dirt. I think people would be surprised to think that I probably spend 60 to 70% of my working time agent facing with my people. That's the highest ROI on what I contribute to the enterprise, right? Like being connected to my people, both is retention, attraction, right? Which growth is all that matters for enterprises. It's also like how I actually know what's going on. Like if I wasn't as accessible as I am, I wouldn't have realized that Friday that if I did not make that decision on Monday, it was going to be an existential crisis. Because these agents have a super flat, easy, I like DMs and workplace chats and like all the 10 different ways they know how to get a hold of me. And I think what's more different is I've made it okay. I've normalized it for them. Like, I think the number one thing I hear at events, it's like, you're so down to earth, you're sort of like me. But because I don't know how to be any other way because these are my friends. I'm like, well, what do you expect me to be like? I actually don't know how to be any different than this. And so my prioritization is them. When Holly and I wrote the buyer broker agreement, it was like on a weekend, I called her. I'm like, hey, let's just pull out a blank sheet. But like, what needs to be in there? Obviously, the lawyers needed to check it. But it's like, I was like, I don't like that paragraph. Can we make that short? Can we just kill that paragraph?
I have to say, it's written in plain English, which is pretty rare.
That was the goal. And so, if you have the right people, you don't need to micromanage anybody. What is the highest ROI on my contribution to the business that we can control?
So we're running a little short on time. I know we could talk for hours, but I just have to ask you about the leverage you're getting with AI and best practices for brokerages that want to create a culture of experimentation around AI.
We could talk about this for an hour.
Yep.
But this is something that I think will resonate with you and me and then the non-technical folks. So let's go through any technical advancement that you've experienced and I've experienced in our functional lifetimes. There was a level of gatekeeping from technical folk, right? Like any new code base popped off or, dynamic elastic search. I still needed an engineer to do that for me.
Sure.
I think where the world really changed in AI is in the last 6 months with vibe coding, right? Lovable just got like the biggest round ever. And like, they're 8 months old and I think we've been using it for 7 months.
I think it's the fastest company to ever reach 100 million in annual recurring revenue.
In ARR. And so, and again, I can get really in the esoteric weeds. I don't worry about like agentic workflows replacing humans. But I think we're like 2 to 3 years away from like most B2B SaaS platforms not existing anymore. Because a B2B SaaS product is a UI layer and user interface layer for the non-technical folks listening that is normally accessing proprietary data, right? So as someone who's built a lot of software like you have, take the number 83 thing on your roadmap. That's not like mission critical, but probably pretty cool. I had an offsite with VPs, SVPs up, like 30 of them. And Seth Siegler, our CIO, did an hour session on Lovable. And at 10 o'clock, we broke, and I'm like, hey, what's your list of the stuff the tech team's never going to get to that I know they're never going to get to? Just go build it. And then we did show and tell in the afternoon. And I literally sat in the front row like a little kid with a smile from ear to ear. And I'm talking about 50, 60-year-old real estate people.
Right.
Very senior, very sophisticated real estate people, but by definition, not technical at all. Build the stuff that they've wanted their whole
prototype or build. Is it production ready?
Well, see, that's the beauty of it. So lovable, before engineers listening to this freak out on me, what I think that is we've short-circuited, kind of reversed the technical build process. So now, once upon a time, the V1 of Remind was me sitting with a product manager,
right,
writing down my requirements, giving it to a designer to then show me a wireframe where I was like, were you in the same meeting I was in? Because that's not what I wanted.
Yeah. Our head of product is now using these tools to essentially consolidate all that work you just talked about. On AI replacing software companies, I think you're wrong. I hope you're wrong. But if you're right, I hope you accept my resume in a few years.
Well, it depends on what I think you serve is a broad, almost B2C market.
It's B2B2C. Yeah.
You think of it as, no, agents are still C's, in my opinion. B2C. I'm talking about pure B2B where it's a visualization layer on my data. And I'm literally using it to access my data. And so what I can tell you is there was a piece of enterprise software, I'll leave their name out of it, that we're going to deploy that basically was a UI layer over 4 or 5 disparate data sets for us for querying data. Versus now I have a custom GPT that's on our data set where if you were one of my licensed agents and you and I were about to get on a call, I could type into it. I said, tell me everything you know about Andrew Flachner.
Right.
And it would say license transfer 2019, last 2024 transactions, volume, units, capped, icon, who's your upline. And that used to take 2 phone calls to 2 different entities and 3 different platforms because I didn't have a credential into that to pull it. And again, and my opinion is in my vertical. And so we can both be right.
That's right. All right, last question. I've asked this to everyone I've had on the podcast, but what does it look like to live your best life? This is a broader question than how are things going at eXp, but what does happiness look like for you? What does it look like to live your best life?
I think that's a great question, and I actually encourage agents to think about that as the starting point. Bigger is not better. Better is better. And I think better is based on the season of life you're in. I am a father of a 10 and 8-year-old. I travel a lot less than every other CEO. And that's not an accident. That's by design, right? One of my things when Glenn called me, I said, I don't want to go anywhere. He's like, all right, you got to go to eXpCon. And not because we're at Inman. He said, you have to go to Inman once a year. He said, commit to the January one and you can go to the summer one if it's up to you and it works for your family. I do travel a little bit more than that, but you recognize I'm not at most places.
Right. I'm trying to cut back too.
I just say no. And again, I am pragmatically ruthless with everything, right? Mateo, who's with us on this trip, I probably 4 more years of putting him to bed, right? That's 1,200 more nights. Then I have hopefully 60 years with him because I'm going to live a long time. He's going to live a long time. But he was not that squeaky voice where I'm a superhero. No amount of money, no amount of titles, no amount of accolades, no amount of stage time come close to that. I'm not making anyone who's making a different choice be wrong about it. I'm just radically, that's important to me. Because at the end of the day, I just want them to care how I showed up.
I think it's a great place to end it. Leo, thank you so much. For everyone who's watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast on your favorite app, please be sure to like and subscribe. And I'm your host, Andrew Flachner. This is the Playmakers Podcast. We'll see you next time.